It's my pleasure to introduce the final talk of the day. And with me I have Ed Clancy. And Ed, well, what can we say about Ed? 3-time gold medal winner. His medals are on display if you want incontrovertible proof, unless he's stolen them. A key member of the much vaunted Team GB, and specifically the cycling team. And Ed's going to talk about his experience on that, some of the lessons and reflections on that, and maybe some of how that applies outside that and in the modern world. So without further ado, Ed, all yours.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. I tell you what, that countdown reminded me a little bit of the start of a bike race. But no, thanks everyone. Thanks for the kind introduction. Thanks for having me here today. I'm going to kick off with a quote, which says, it's not a picture, it's a quote. "The Great Britain cycling team has risen from mediocrity to become one of the most successful teams in recent history." And I know there's a couple of bike fans in the room that might agree with that, but everybody else is probably thinking with bias right now. So just to back that up with a little bit of data, here we have the medal table just from track cycling from Beijing, London, Rio and Tokyo. So the Great Britain cycling team got 44 medals, 22 gold, 14 silver, 8 bronze, which was exactly twice as many as our closest competitors, the Netherlands. Probably worth mentioning at this stage that when I was a lad, there was this fella called Chris Boardman, 1992, popped up, got 1 gold medal. There was Jason Queally in the year 2000, again, sort of like popped up and got a gold medal. But there was, clearly a step change in our performance. Now, as much as I'd love to take all the credit for that myself, I was involved in a very high-performing team. I was really fortunate to have great leaders, great psychologists, great coaches. So I guess the plan today, with that in mind, is to not just bang on about me and my journey, or even the journey of the Great Britain cycling team, is to kind of highlight some of these high-performance principles and learnings that I got off Dave Brailsford, Professor Steve Peters and so on, and try and reflect them to yourselves into your lives. I know we've got a bit of time for questions at the end, but if there's anyone who's got a burning question or something doesn't make any sense, I won't take it personally, just shout it out, abuse, anything, it's fine. All right, so from day one, I was born in Barnsley. Just a bit of background on myself. I was born in Barnsley, 1985, so just up the road from here. Very sort of traditional South Yorkshire upbringing. My biological father used to work in Sheffield Steel for the short period of time that I knew him. I was essentially brought up by my mum and my granddad for a vast majority of my childhood. The garden gnome here has quite clearly fallen in love with a bike. And funnily enough, that's one thing that never really changed. I never set out to be anyone or do anything in particular. I just love riding bikes. There was a key moment. I was a bit of an horrible kid, to be honest. I wasn't that interested in school, and I used to spend as much time as I could sort of out and about with my pals. I guess it was just fun, freedom, independence, and long before the bike became a vehicle for success, it was just my vehicle to sort of get them back to and from school, get down to the local recreational ground and so on. But Kevin, my stepdad, Clancy, in the middle there, he was a big influence on me. It's no coincidence I took his name on, as soon as I could on my 18th birthday. And they say there's a couple of things you need in life to be successful: hard work, opportunity, and just one person that believes you're not a complete waste of time. And at that point, I had all three. So there was this opportune moment when I was at school. I mentioned Jason Queally earlier, actually. He got some funding in the year 2000. Now, instead of spending that funding at the upper echelons of sport, they decided to buy a load of transit vans and send them into school playgrounds to really try to increase the funnel of talent that they were finding. Cycling was a very niche sport, and you only really got into it, if your dad or your dad's dad's dad or so on was into cycling, right? So these static watt bikes that you might see at the gym started popping up around schools across the country. And they just so happened to turn up at my school, so I had a go, passed a couple of tests, and we got invited to the Great Britain cycling team. And this was my first silver medal of the first year at the Junior Track Championships in Manchester. things progressed and we started doing a little bit better. Some of the cycling aficionados might recognize Geraint Thomas there in that fetching green jersey. And this was a key moment for me because it got me a place on the Great Britain Cycling Team Academy. Now this is quite a famous photo because there's a Tour de France winner here called Jan Ullrich that was significantly older than myself, Geraint and Mark Cavendish. Now the three of us, we were 3 of 6 on this academy program, so we gave up on our non-existent academic ambitions. We moved into an apartment in Manchester and we went riding bikes. Now out of the 6 of us, I was the 3rd most successful really on this academy, behind Geraint and Cav, which I hope puts a little bit of credibility into how successful this academy was. Now, our coach was a fella called Rod Ellingworth, and on day 1 of this academy, there was no bike riding, no road, no track, but what we did do is we sat down with a pen and a crayon, and Rod told us to write down our team values. Everything he thought it would be that would make us successful for the next 20 years as professional cyclist. So we wrote down all sorts of things, you know, we've got to eat well, we've got to sleep well, go to bed with a clean bike, try and be professional, try and be polite, and so on. And alongside these values, we also wrote down a big list of punishments. If you were late, you had to shave your head, for example. So here we are. It's a couple of years later, but we're still trying to learn high performance principles. But this is a key moment. I was 20 years old, and this was my sort of moment of graduating off the academy. And I rode in the qualifying round of the World Championships. And essentially at this point, I entered the Olympic team with the big boys preparing for Beijing. And I was sort of slowly coming towards my first high performance principle, which almost all of you will have heard of. Which of course is something known as marginal gains. And I bet almost everyone's heard of this, right? Now, before I start banging on about the mechanics of marginal gains, there was a fella called Dave, who later went on to become Sir David Brailsford. Now, Dave never professed to have invented marginal gains, but I do think he popularized it, particularly in the world of sport, if not business and everything else. Now, when I knew Dave, he was relatively new to leading and managing. He didn't have a great deal of knowledge about cycling, to be fair, but he did have a superpower, which I'm going to get onto in 4 or 5 minutes' time. The actual mechanics of marginal gains is dead easy. Someone like Dave would start with a big dream, a big vision, and Dave, you know, quite openly told he wanted to win everything. All right? So that on its own is a big, undigestible dream. The premise of marginal gains is you break this down into small component parts, so there might have been 10 events in Beijing. I just so happened to be part of one of those 10 events. There was 4 guys in the team, so already you're breaking it down, this big goal, into 10 events. There's 4 guys in this team. You can break down Paul Manning, Geraint Thomas, Bradley Wiggins, Ed Clancy. You can break that down into a power equation and a drag, which is essentially what going fast on a bike is. So for argument's sake, let's just talk about reducing the amount of aerodynamic drag. You can put me in a wind tunnel, and you can say, right, there's a body, there's a bike, and then, you know, when in Rome, you know, we didn't just compare different manufacturers' bikes. We'd break them down to the nth degree. So I mean, there's a couple of people that have come to me already and had a look at this bike and sort of been a little bit wooed about how light it is and how much it costs. But I still work with the research and innovation team, and there is not a single ball bearing in this bike. There's not a drop of oil on this chain that'll make its way anywhere near one of our Olympic bikes. Just, you know, for example, we were looking at front wheels the other day. When we're in a wind tunnel, we're not just comparing different manufacturers' front wheels. You know, we're comparing, like, what's the different glue that bonds the carbon fiber together? How much pressure are we running in the front tire? Are we even putting air in the front tire? Is it helium? Is it nitrogen? What is it? And, you know, even the ball bearings, we're talking about ceramic, the stainless steel. I know there's a few engineers in this room, and this whole premise of marginal gains is dead straightforward and dead obvious, right? But I guess as a general principle, you've only got to be 1 or 2% better than your competitors to get the lion's share of the money or the medals in our case, right? Off we went to Beijing, and we didn't quite win everything like Dave had hoped for, but I think we got as close as any Olympic team had at that point in time. But I want to get back to Dave. I said he had a superpower, right? And I've seen way more charismatic and interesting people on a stage talk about marginal gains that perhaps haven't been as involved in British cycling as I have. And my own take on it is that marginal gains was never really about engineering. It was about a curiosity, a willingness to learn and harvest in an environment, Dave said it earlier on the discussion panel, where failure's okay and you just want to learn from that. So Dave's superpower, he wasn't an engineer, he didn't break down the ball bearings, but what he did have, and he still has it to this day, anyone listens to Dave Brailsford on a podcast today, he's still listening, he's still inquisitive, he's still curious. And this is a guy that's got a 25% stake in Man United right now. He's a successful guy, but he's still like a student. So, what's marginal gains about? In my humble opinion, willingness to learn, harvest in an environment where failure is okay. Does that make sense so far? All right, that's chapter 1 complete. Congratulations. Any questions so far? Okay. So that was my first Olympic cycle, and I'll talk a little bit more about like the emotion involved with winning the Olympics and so on. But just to kind of like proceed the next chapter in my life, we were heading up to London at this point in time. I think every single rider, every single member of staff probably thought that, if we go to Beijing and we get 2, 3, 4 gold medals, that'll be a job well done. The difference was like approaching your home Olympics this time. Everyone expected the all singing and dancing Great Britain cycling team to come up with the goods. Every time you turn the radio on, every time you turn the TV on, every time you spoke to your mum, your brother, your sister, your girlfriend, whoever it was just like this inescapable thing on the horizon. Ultimately, me and my little team, we kind of knew that in a few years' time we'd have 4 minutes that were either going to be the best 4 minutes of our life or the worst. And, not just for the riders, but the whole organisation was trying to perform under pressure. That's what I remember from the 2012 cycle. And this isn't something that's unique to cycling or cyclists. I'm sure this is something everyone can relate to. So I've spoke about a guy called Dave, and now I'm going to tell you about a guy called Steve. Now, has anyone heard of this fella? Steve. He's a psychiatrist. So Professor Steve Peters is a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, which is important because Steve was medically trained to understand how the different lobes within the brain work, all right? Again, like Dave, he went on to be massively successful. He worked with Ronnie O'Sullivan, brought him back from a really difficult place. There's a massive step change in the Liverpool football team in 1 year. Steve was behind that. Even the England football team, Professor Steve Peters. He's wrote a big best-selling business book called The Chimp Paradox. I don't know if there's a few nods now. Yeah, that's Steve. Now, I was fortunate enough to work with this guy for 15 years, and I still check in with him now and again. Now, what Steve did that was, I'd say unique and also very, very helpful, was that he broke down the incredibly complex subject of neuroscience to a really basic level, so even someone like me could understand. So very simplistically, we took the human brain and looked at it with 2 different lobes, 2 different functioning parts of the brain, okay? So this is the frontal lobe, right? Now, for all intents and purposes, this is what makes us smart. This is what makes us human. This is the reason, we've boomed in population. It's responsible for logical, pragmatic, sensible thinking. It's the reason we can make a jumbo jet, a supercomputer, we can put man on the moon, we can make sophisticated societies, right? That's the frontal lobe. Now, almost in conflict with this frontal lobe, we have this limbic system, right? If anyone's ever heard of fight, flight, and freeze, yeah, that's the limbic system. So, everyone's felt, you might be scared when you're speaking on stage. You might be going for a job interview, you might be having an argument with the other half, it might be an incident of road rage on the way home tonight. Everyone knows what it feels like. We get this sort of surge of adrenaline, this uncomfortable feeling. And this isn't just a philosophy, this is physics. If you put in a functional MRI scanner and you flash up a scary picture and you make a screeching noise, there's a physical movement of blood to this limbic system, right? Now, I probably mentioned 3 or 4 minutes ago that we had this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that could, change things for the better. What I did as a cyclist, the team pursuit which you're about to see, was all about making cool, calm, calculated, pragmatic, rational decisions when everyone's kind of like losing the plot. Sport is emotive, right? That's what makes it interesting. The limbic system is your emotional epicenter. Now, whether you're talking about sport or business, so many successful people that I've seen on my journey know how to manage their emotions, right? That's what this whole chapter is about. Does this make sense so far? Yeah. All right. So I'm going to show you the race, and I'm going to go back to how you might be able to control this flow of blood and control these emotions, right? So this is what a team pursuit looks like. And I'll try and talk you through it because I know not everyone's a cyclist here. So here we are. This is the once-in-a-lifetime moment, 2012. Oh, excuse me, team. There's Sir Bradley Wiggins watching on. There's Geraint Thomas, my best pal in the green jersey that you might remember, sort of grew up together. It's Pete Kenner, Stephen Burke, and that's me in the gate there. It just so happens to be the most nerve-wracking job of them all. Now, maybe we'll go into this in the Q&A, but if you look at the athletes on the other side of the track, there's Michael Hepburn, Rowan Dennis, Glenn O'Shea, Jack Bobridge. Jack Bobridge, I believe, has just got out of prison for dealing MDMA. And yeah, Hepburn is it Hepburn? One of them is in big trouble right now. The struggle's real in retirement from professional sports. But back to the job. You can't imagine the emotions that are going on in your head right now. The countdown's even worse when you're lining up for the home Olympics. So we have no form of feedback on the bikes. There's no computer. We don't know how fast or how slow we're going. All we have is a coach that'll point out that walks backwards and forwards on a line, okay? So you see that coach there? If he walks backwards 1 metre, that means we're 1/10 of a second per lap up on schedule. Now back to what I said, this isn't just 4 guys that have taken the brain out and just going flat out. We're trying to modulate our effort on a tightrope. If we go 4 or 5/10 lap too quick early on, we will explode and there'll be no finish line in sight. And obviously if we go too slow, then the Australians are back in the game and we're going to start losing pretty quick.
The world record holders
on a very simplistic level, you understand the reasons why we do a turn at the front and then we change. It's because it's very, very hard on the front. We're pushing all the air particles out the way. And in the wheels, it's relatively easy. So we're sharing the workload. Obviously, a lot of trust's involved in this game. We're doing 45 mile an hour at this point, and things do occasionally go wrong.
3:52.499 is the world record.
Probably worth me saying at this point in time now that if you're in pain, if you're sleep deprived, if you're hungry, if you're too hot, you're too cold, guess where the brain sends blood? The limbic lobe, right? It's your survival instinct. So the more tired we get, the more mistakes you make.
They get the bell lap, 250 metres to go for Great Britain. Bradley Wiggins looks on. He was part of the Olympic triumph.
This is a pretty obscure sport, isn't it, for the people that don't see this a lot?
They won't care because they're going back to back as Olympic champions.
And there we go.
Fantastic
That was our
performance
home
and a
Olympics
new
done and
world
dusted.
record. 3:51.659. They've done it again.
Yeah.
Team GB absolutely.
As much as I like to indulge, right? So, thanks very much. Thanks, that's very kind. You might wonder why you sometimes watch the World Cup football final and you see the best players in the world don't necessarily look like that. You know, it's quite common for, we sat around with the boys, I could have done that. And you know what, you probably could. Because it's very, very hard to manage your emotions in that position. You know, when you're in an incredibly stressful environment, people do things on impulse, on emotion, not with pragmatic thought and reason. Does that make sense? So the question you might have now is, well, how do you control these emotions? How do you control blood and get it back in the frontal lobe? If somebody says, don't think of a pink elephant, if you're anything like me, you can think of nothing else right now, right? So you've got to replace that with a system and a process. The frontal lobe likes those two things, right? So somebody's telling you before your interview, before your bike race, don't be nervous, no use whatsoever. So when you're sat on the start line there and the beeps are going down and you're looking at that board and you're thinking about, oh my God, what we're going to do if we win, what we're going to do if we lose, what we're going to do when Jill Douglas puts the microphone in my face when the handlebars have snapped or my chain snapped or I've had a puncture. You can't, it's not rational, it's not logical, forget it. What you've got to think is, I breathe in on 5, I breathe out on 4, breathe in on 3, breathe out on 2, and then you put your first pedal rev down. And then all of a sudden you're thinking system, process, right, where am I on the track? I know I need to be slightly an inch that way, an inch that way. This is the first banking. I need to start like hunkering down, getting my big shoulders in, get an aero, get on the back straight. Think about my cadence. Think about that rhythm I have in my head. Do you know what I mean? You've got a system and a process for every single meter of the way. In the same way that tomorrow I'll be doing a presentation in a totally different world. And if things don't go right, I don't want to hit panic stations. I'll have a simple system and a process to get me back on track for that as well. The words, Rome wasn't built in a day, are behind me for good reason. Every time I went to see Professor Steve, he always told me that this is a skill that you need to work on over time, right? What I'm getting at here is if me, you, and anybody else went down the gym this afternoon, we wouldn't expect to come out tomorrow morning looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger, would we? Like, we know training the body takes hours and years and decades even to become strong. It's exactly the same training in mind. You can't just expect to sort of walk into an Olympic velodrome and say, right, today I am nothing but pragmatic reason. It doesn't work like that. You've got to train this skill. I'm really conscious of time, so we'll go into the detail of that in the Q&A if you're interested later, but there's methods and techniques that you can train yourself to be better at controlling your emotions. But very simply, starting off by replacing catastrophizing or trying to prophesize the future with a system and a process is a good start. Okay? So that was chapter 2. Is this all right so far? Yes. Any questions at this point? All right. So moving on. Yeah, at this point, I'll tell you that what does it feel like to win an Olympics? It feels, I'm a few years into retirement now. And, I'm fortunate enough that, good things occasionally come my way. But there's been absolutely nothing that's even come close to that feeling of crossing the line. With 3 of your best pals, nothing's even come. I don't care what drug you take at the weekend. There's nothing that comes close. And that's great in the moment. And I really should get a graph for this, but I'm just going to try and draw it out of my hands instead. But again, this is something Professor Steve told me. This is really well documented with lottery winners. People who win the lottery, people who win Olympic gold medals. On the y-axis, you have like your happiness, and overnight you've got everything you've ever wanted. For the lottery winner, it might be the Bentley or the mansion or whatever it is. And as an Olympian, the kid that dreamed about that, you've got it. And after a period of 6 to 18 months, time's on the x-axis, everyone's happiness goes back down to where it started, right? Almost without exception. So that's an interesting place to be, actually. And I touched on it there, actually, at the start of that video. A lot of athletes struggle in the afterlife. A lot of business owners that sell their business. I've met so many unbelievably successful business types that have sold businesses that sort of move on and then enter a massive depression, in a clinical sense. There's no coincidence. And the point I'm trying to get at is this whole next chapter was really kind of defined as overcoming adversity, both on an individual level and as a team. I could probably speak for an hour on the complexities of struggling with organizational success. The Great Britain cycling team had a whole building full of people, engineers, sports scientists, coaches, leaders that had a massive green tick in their CV. And we were in this funny government-funded organization where we didn't really have the money to keep them. Loads of my teammates left for professional road careers. The coaches, the sports scientists, the leaders, they'll leave for golf, rugby, cricket, tennis, motorsport, you name it. We lost so much of that intellectual property. We couldn't afford to keep them. So, the good news is we did manage to claw it back. Which kind of brings me to this fella. There's a guy called Heiko Salzwedel. He was our coach. So he wasn't a leader like Dave Brailsford across the whole organization, but he was kind of like the leader within our men's team pursuit. And this guy wasn't textbook in every way. I know earlier on in the day you sort of touched on compassionate leadership and things like that. There was none of that with Heiko, right? He was very much sort of his way or the highway, and that's not textbook. And in many regards, I wouldn't say he was the best leader I ever had. But one thing that Heiko gave us, and if anyone ever asks me what's the one thing you want from a leader, it's just clarity. And I can only describe it like a zip. Once we had a really clearly defined dream and vision of where we're going, what we were saying yes to, what we were saying no to, what was important to us, I can only describe it like a zip. And every lock of the zip was in alignment, like the marketing team, the engineering team, the logistics team, the riders, our race programs, everything just fitted into alignment underneath Heiko's beautiful clarity of all right, this is where we're going, team. And that's another analogy is like a pack of husky dogs. Watch them next time you're watching David Attenborough. They will go through hell and high water and still be wagging their tails and having a play fight. If they're all like a pack of cyclists, if they're all pulling against a weight and they're all pulling in the same direction, I tell you what, nothing's been more powerful to me, both as a cyclist and working in jobs outside of cycling now, clarity. So that really helped in terms of our organization getting back on track. In terms of my own little selfish world of adversity, I was thriving under Heiko. I had the best form of my life. I was absolutely loving it. And then I had a big old crash in the Tour of Britain. And that was probably half an hour post-back operation. Now, it's a really difficult period of my life. And it's, and your grandma says, save for a rainy day. I mean, as a professional athlete, it's going to rain. And it had a downpour that week. I'm mindful that it's a first world problem. Nobody feels sorry for you. I was really fortunate to have a good professional road team, good sponsors. You had 2 Olympic gold medals in my back pocket at that point in time. But it was hard work. You quite quickly lost almost everything. Your entire income, any security, any sort of pragmatic vision of a future and success. The good news is you quickly find out who your friends are on the plus side. I woke up and I had 3 text messages on my phone. There was one from a girlfriend, one from one of my teammates, and one from Heiko. I want to cut to the chase because I want to tell you what Heiko said. We got back 9 months later and we managed to bag my 3rd gold medal. When I sat down with Heiko, I was hoping I'd get a bit of a pat around the back, an arm around the shoulder, sort of like, it's going to be all right, Ed, type conversation. But instead, we got the facts of life. And they were, life's unfair, there's no guarantees, and the goalposts move. I remember it like yesterday. And I just remember sitting there thinking like, wow, that is crushing. But he was right, and that was probably the most valuable 5 minutes of my life. And the point Heiko was trying to make, he was a very blunt man. The point Heiko was trying to make was not to sort of berate me and hit me down. He was just trying to say, look, Ed, this was never guaranteed. The goalposts move, we all saw that with coronavirus, right? Life is unfair. We're all born into an unfair life. We all see people that are born into success and riches. We all see people that are promoted above us that are, you may or may not consider them more competent. So Heiko told me to sit on the facts of life, go away and think about it and come back. So I did. Once I got my head around the facts of life, he called me in again and said, Ed, come in for a second meeting. And this time was a little bit more inspirational. And he said, right, Ed, what do you really want to do in the next 9 months? And I said, well, to be honest, Heiko, I kind of like the idea of like getting back in the team, winning another gold medal, becoming the most successful team pursuiter the world's ever seen, and then cracking on for some more. And he said, right, that's not too ambitious, Ed. He said, it's good to have a stake out there, like be ambitious, like go for it. And from what it's worth, from my personal opinion, I'd always recommend to people young and old, be ambitious, like put a stake out there, do something that pulls at the heartstrings a bit. And for me, that was my dream. But as some of the performance authors will tell you, a dream without a pragmatic, attainable sort of checklist is just a dream. So language was very important. My dream remained a dream, i.e. something that might or might not come true. The goals only went on the goal list if I could make it a tangible thing. 9 hours sleep a day, 5 fruit and veg a day, checking with the coach 3 times a week. I used to lie in the back seat of a transit van to get escorted to and from a physiotherapist, which was pretty much full time at that point in time. And the list was long, but every day I went through this big, boring, pragmatic checklist. I'd say about 4 days out of 10 I was motivated, but that dream kept me going. That was my little checklist of like how to overcome adversity. I look at it every time it hits the fan, even these days in different walks of life. I'm still ambitious. I've still got way more ambition than talent, but that's a good thing. And all I do is I have a little list of pragmatic things I can think of that'll hopefully get me close or closer to that dream. Does that make sense? Chapter 3 done. So moving on to my 4th and final chapter of Olympic cycling. Truth be told, I was never the same rider after that operation. So I don't know if anyone's had a bad back and anyone's had back surgery, but I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And the back operation, they sort of go in there and they remove some disc material because I had so much pressure on one of my nerves that went to my leg that I had no option. I had to get operated on because this leg was going to die. I had too much pressure on the nerve. We had to go in there. The small of your back is a very, very concentrated part of muscle, and it doesn't perform that well once it's had a big knife stuck through it. So what's that cost me in real terms? There's a lot of data-heavy people in the room. I lost about 2% of power on my right leg. And at the very top, that was enough to make me sort of slightly fall into the pack a little bit. That said, I was old and I was wise, and I was still only 32, 33 years old moving into this last cycle. There's one principle I'm going to touch on just very briefly. This isn't one of my main points, but I went to see another psychiatrist called Pete Lindsay, who used to work with the Man City football team. And this is probably something that everyone in this room can relate to, but I was unbelievably busy. I had a lot of sponsors, my road teams wanted to kind of catch up on the missed time I'd spent on the operating table and so on. The Great Britain cycling team wanted their arms around me to bring me back into the circle to help qualify for the next Olympics. Just friends, family, just trying to catch up on, all the usual post-Olympic stuff. And I'll cut a very long story short by saying that at the grand age of 32, I had gout, which when you get gout in your 30s, it means you're an alcoholic or you're just completely burnt out. Unfortunately, it was the latter for me, and I was just dead. So I really took this, I went home from this meeting with Pete Lindsay, the psych, and I had one piece of paper that had all my problems in my life, and there was a lot. I had another piece of paper, and he told me to read it when I got home, and it just said, less but better, less but better. I just went to town on that, and I removed a lot of races from a road program. I spoke to my agent. I removed a lot of sponsors and commercial partners. I just did the ones that were like meaningful, real, and purposeful in alignment, with my goal. And this less but better thing really served me well. And I was fortunate enough to the grand age of 36 to make it to my fourth and final Olympics in Tokyo. Now, I was very happy I was there. It was, it's always an achievement to do 4 Olympics in a row. But obviously I wanted to win. We'd been part of a very successful team. I'd had a successful run myself. And I was there to do business. For the first time in my Olympic career, and not my career in cycling, but in terms of Olympics, I did the qualifying round, and that was a bit shit, to be honest. Out of the 4 riders, I was the weakest there. Now, what I probably haven't explained yet is there's always a reserve rider, okay? Now, in the Olympics, the 4 riders that have been chosen, they are sort of legally protected, right? Because it's the big one. If you get your name on that start list, you're the 4 chosen riders, you're in there unless you put your hand up and say, nah, this is not for me. So if you have a shocker in the qualifying round, you've got a big decision to make, right? This is the point I'm trying to get to. You can either put your hand up and say, actually, you know what? I've taken it as far as I can go. For whatever reason, I've got a bad back. I haven't been eating well, I haven't been sleeping well, I'm jet lagged. Your biological things, it's very hard to perform on the top of your game on any given day. Or you kind of like, you dig your heel in when you say, I earned my spot in the team. I'm legally here. This is my last hurrah. Winners never quit. Quitters never win. Now, I guess the point I'm trying to get at is decision making. Now, you remember probably about 20 minutes ago, I mentioned that we had this coach called Rod Ellingworth that told us to write down our values. Yeah. So one of our values that we crayoned out was the team is always more important than any individual. Now that value of ours served us well so many times over the years. It served me well when I was substituted into teams. When you're working on the road in particular, there's one guy that stands on the podium, there's a whole army of people that support that, both on the road, in the team bus, in the hotels and so on, right? It has to be a value of any high-performing team. As does openness, honesty, integrity, hard work. But there's a difference between writing a big list of your values on the wall of the gym and actually making decisions off the back of them. And unfortunately for me, that was my time to make a values-based decision. People, more and more age these days, like people wrongly assume you can speak on stage. People always ask me, can you come and talk about marginal gains? Can you come and talk about Professor Steve Peters and the chimp paradox? And yeah, I can. But if you think back to that medal table at the start, more than marginal gains or learning how to control your emotions, what underpinned the foundation of our success, the Great Britain cycling team, was we knew what our values were and we stood by them and we made decisions in alignment to those values. It's not sexy, it's not something you could sell a book on perhaps, but through my own eyes, that's only my take on it. Making value-based decisions was the most important thing. Does that make sense? All right, yeah. So I guess just to take you into the afterlife, just to bring you up to date with what I'm doing now, I am still very fortunate to work with the research and innovation team with British Cycling. I'm a bit of a tech, I don't know what the right word is. I'm obsessed with bikes. I just love this sort of beautiful marriage between like human performance and engineering, and I still work with the wind tunnel guys on the latest bike. Do a bit of data analysis. I did a bit of consultancy work actually with the triathlon team. They did an amazing job in Paris. Not down to me, but it was a great privilege to work with them. It's a real small, mighty team. That was a great privilege to work with them. I'm an active travel commissioner up in South Yorkshire now, so a little bit back to where it all started. You know, I love riding a bike. It's about freedom, independence, exploration, and I do find it mildly upsetting that not every kid can act upon that innate desire. So I do my best in that role. And that concludes my talk. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for listening, everyone. Looks like we're going to have a couple of questions from the...
Okay. The microphone's on. Fantastic. I should say I killed the Menti link earlier, so if you're hoping to ask questions via Menti, don't waste your time. Admin oversight, so it's a roving microphone, and Phil, you have the microphone.
Oh, excellent. Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Ed. That's great. You talked partway through about pressure and your ability to perform.
Yeah.
Did you ever get better times from a relaxed environment as opposed to the high pressure, high profile events?
Oh yeah. I'm sort of mindful to discuss this topic in detail because I'm not a professor or a scientist or a doctor, but the human brain has one response to stress, right? And it's cortisol. So if you're hungry, cortisol. You're sleep deprived, cortisol. You feel pain on a bike, cortisol. Right? If you have an argument with the missus, cortisol. And essentially what I'm saying is there's only so much cortisol you can take before your body kind of shuts down and you almost like hibernate like a bear, right? There's this saying, a happy cyclist is a fast cyclist. And but there's actually a physical reason behind that. You know, if you suppress someone with loads of cortisol, you literally, you don't sleep as well, you don't digest food as well, you produce less testosterone. You know, so what I'm saying is one of the best performance enhancers you can have as a cyclist or an athlete is being happy and being positive and having endorphins and serotonin in your life. Is that something that's unique to athletes in the cycling team? I doubt it. You know, the most productive environments I look at outside of sport are positive, happy places. David said earlier that, you know, failure is not something that's demonized. Failure's not something you're aiming for, but it's like, all right, team, we ain't got this one right. Let's just wait till it cools down. We used to do what we call a cold debrief. Wait till the emotions kind of settle down for a couple of days. We'd sit down, be very analytical, say, right, this is just going to serve us the information we need to win. And to answer your question, that was a long answer. I always perform better if I could keep stress on the low down. Unless there's something wrong with you, you're always going to walk into an environment like the 2012 Olympics, or, you know, unless there's something innately wrong with anyone, like, you know, in your team that really doesn't want to be there, who just don't care at all, they're probably going to have more than the right amount of stress, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Hi, Ed. That was one of the most interesting talks I've had for a while. I'm not as into cycling, but what was your value-based decision you made in the end, and how did you feel about it?
Say that again, sorry, what was my...
The last decision, that value-based decision you had to make, what was your decision, and how did you feel about it later?
Yeah, I mean, the value I had was the team was more important than my own personal ambitions. I've always had this idea of honesty is such an important value of mine, you know, and I'll never let that sort of personal value be compromised in any sort of line of work that I do. Makes life quite easy, actually. You know, trying to hide the truth is really quite a difficult, energy-draining game. Doesn't always make you popular, but I'm always happy to say the truth. If we sit down in a debrief, like, you know, after qualifying, I mean, you can see it on a graph, but what you can't categorically say off the back of a graph is like, am I going to be better or worse tomorrow? You just have this knowledge as a cyclist of what trajectory you're on. And yeah, I knew at that point, the honest answer for me was, I'm not going to get better by tomorrow. I'm not going to be one of the 4 strongest members. So I was open, I was honest, I had an awareness that the team was more important, the team's success was more important than my own. And yeah, that's the decision I made, was to step myself aside from the team, substitute in a young lad, and they did better for not having me in there.
Did you get a medal?
No, the team didn't get a medal either, but I tell you what, like, they had a good chance, and there's a lot of irregularities during that whole event, but they didn't know. But what it did mean was there was a young lad that had his first Olympic taste, and he got his first silver medal a few weeks back in Paris. And that was a good learning experience from him. But yeah, just to give him more like credibility to this whole values piece, I was listening to Toto Wolff, the team principal of Mercedes F1, who dominated for a decade. And Jake Humphrey asked him, as he does, like, what's your non-negotiables? Like, what do you value? And straight away, Toto Wolff says, I want my workforce to be honest, I want them to tell me the truth, and I want no bullshit, without hesitation. I spoke about rugby today with Paul at the back. They love their values as well. And again, they have this idea of ownership. Every single player, every single senior manager, every sponsor takes a learn, as they call it, to sweep out the locker room. Yeah, again, like this idea that like they're all on a level, they're all pulling in the same direction, and they mean it, and they show it by tangible actions. Yeah. Thanks. Oh, yeah. Thanks, team. Good questions. I'm enjoying this.
Hi, Ed. Thanks ever so much. Love watching and hearing about cycling. So perfect for me. You talked about Marginal Gains and what they've brought to the team. We have an awful lot of things we could do that we think would be better, but not necessarily the time or resource to do all of them.
Yeah.
So did Dave have a system for understanding or working out what was the best thing to attack first?
Yeah, it's a really good question. That's a really good question. Part of what I do now is I work with this active travel commissioner, right? I work within a council building. All right, guess who hasn't got enough time, who hasn't got enough money, who hasn't got enough resource? And this is like, that was a new experience for me. And you know, like, the notion of marginal gains, like, they're just firefighting. And it's really hard work for them. And it's hard work for me. So I think about what can I individually do, you know, to make my life a little bit easier. For example, I was doing some emails at like 11:55, like just before midnight, and my girlfriend was like, "Why are you doing emails?" And I was like, "I have to do them. I just have to do them." It's not every night, don't get me wrong. And she said, "This is going to affect your sleep, you know." And I said, "I know it is. This is blue light coming out of a phone into my face before the strike of midnight." So off the back of that, I had a little thing like, what can I do to sort of like apply marginal gains to myself? So the next morning I bought some like orange glasses. So yeah, some like blue light reducing glasses. So if I'm in one of those situations again where I have to do my emails, I'll do it, but at least it's a marginal gain. I might get 10 minutes more sleep that night. I don't wear the orange glasses out during the day because you look like Jimmy Savile. But little things like that. I've automated my shopping. That saves me half an hour a week. My accountant's got some like online, talk about curiosity and a willingness to learn. I've been putting this thing off for about 4 years. I now got this thing that automates my accounts and invoices. Probably saves me half an hour a month. So I try applying marginal gains to my own life, and I guess you could encourage your team to do that, to make them feel like they're a little bit more with it. In terms of a priority system though, yeah, I think Dave was very analytical, and he loved the engineering and the wind tunnel side because he could see, yeah, if we spent X amount of money in this department, we could get a tangible return. Of course, all this stuff's a little bit involved with guesswork, of 3.5% across the skin suits, the bikes, it's going to cost him X million pound. Now, if the nutritionist went to him and they said, right, we're going to cost X million pound to do X, Y, and Z, could they give him the same tangible return? No. So I guess he just got and reversed engineered it from the numbers and the data they had available to him. When somebody gives you a long answer, it's because they don't know. So yeah, apply marginal gains to the workforce if they're up for it. But yeah, I think Dave was very pragmatic and just like put his budget where he could see the biggest returns.
Hi Ed, it's not a question actually. I guess I just wanted to, just listening to you, I'm not a massive cyclist fan at all, but watching you guys from Beijing through to London was just massively inspirational for me, for my other half, for people that I knew. Just watching you and your mates pedalling around the velodrome was just incredible to watch, and we won. So I just really wanted to say thank you on behalf of a nation, just to say thank you, and yeah, keep going well. That was all.
Cheers, David. Thanks very much. That's very kind. Yeah, thanks, Dave. I know this wasn't a question, but I tell you what, it's down at people like yourself as well that like you're able to do such a thing. It really riles me, when you see people on Instagram usually they like pop up and say, I've become a self-made millionaire, or I'm become a sports champion and I made it on my own. I call BS. Like success in any walk of life is a team sport. It was for me. I had my mentors. I had the Dave Brailsfords, the Steve Peters. I had my stepdad. I had the community coach as a kid. I had teachers that used to lend me cycling shoes and spare inner tubes. I had people that would like give me a pat on the back in the local co-op in Home Firth and say, keep going. So thanks. This means a lot. Cheers.
Yeah, hi. So I am a big cycling fan. Do a lot of cycling myself when I can. My question is about burnout. So, most of us will sit behind a desk all day. Personally, being a cycling fan, I'll try as often as I can just reserve some lunch time and just go out on the bike at lunch or whatever I can do. When you're on a bike day in, day out, what did you use? What tools did you have to try and prevent that burnout that wasn't necessarily physical activity?
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, like, I'm not going to stand here and pretend that I understand fully how hard it is to do that. I have some experience now of like office life and sitting in front of a laptop, and I can see how hard and how tough situations are, particularly when there is a lack of resource and almost like an unsurmountable amount of work. What I will say is I've got a bit of a weird interest in these like performance authors like Matthew Syed, Steve Peters. I think it's Simon Sinek is the why. Why, what, how. Rather than trying to give you a decent answer, I'd look at what he professes. And, if everyone can tell you what they're doing, I'm riding a bike in a circle, I'm sitting in front of a laptop. The ones that are a little bit more in depth can say, right, well, I'm doing this, I'm breaking down these power cranks, and I sit down with my team and we analyse these numbers and what principles that we bring to the party that make us different from everybody else. But the people that really get at it are the ones that can have like a real meaningful, like powerful why. And I'd encourage you to read a bit of Simon Sinek on that, the power of why. The most resilient grafters I've ever met, know why they do it. Yeah. Sorry. Probably shout from there. Yeah.
it's possibly, it might sound like an odd question.
Yeah.
But how selfish or how self-focused do you need to be to succeed? And I could say, where does the balance come between focus and just putting oneself, I know you talk about team, but focus and the balance between focus and putting oneself above everyone else in order to achieve at the level that you have?
Again, a really good question. There's this idea that a lot of sports people are quite innately selfish, and I'd agree with that. You've definitely got to be very self-centered. I think the better ones are the ones that are like, very self-focused. They're thinking about what they're eating, when they're sleeping, what their training looks like. But the real masters of the craft, the Vicky Pendletons, the Chris Hoys, they were interested in the team as well. They were good team players. Oh, man, Chris Hoy's a big dog. I look up to that guy. And but I tell you what, like, if you had a bad race, he was the first one to send you a text. He didn't have time for it. He didn't have time to sit me down at his house at a barbecue after I retired because he knew I'd be lost. But he makes time for it. The most successful people have an awareness that success, again, it's a team sport. There's, again, talking about performance authors, I can't remember which one of them, but they talk about these 3 levels of, I guess you call it dependence. So, at the bottom level, the lowest of the low, you're completely dependent on your coach, whoever it is, like spoon feeding you information. And then at the sort of middle level, people become independent, right? And they work as an island. They sort of rebel, they say they don't need the coach, they know what they're doing. But then the smartest ones, they get this like 3rd level of interdependency, where they're smart enough to set their own goal, their own vision, but they've always got this awareness that their own sort of CEO. You've got to bring other people into it, and the best people do. There was another part to your question, wasn't there?
I guess it's the balance between being focused to achieve and then being...
Yeah, I tell you what, that's right, and that's where I wanted to get back to. This isn't in any way useful, what I'm about to tell you. I was very, very good at riding a bike, and I was ruthlessly obsessed and focused with going around a big wooden track really fast. And I'd say for about 12 years, in my niche little sport, I could do that better than anyone else on the face of this planet. Was I a good family person? Was I particularly sociable? Did I turn up for Christmases, weddings, funerals, stag do's? No. You know what I mean? Just because I was in the top 0.1 percentile in that, my life was a complete failure in almost every other way. And to some extent, it still is. Yeah, honestly, I'm not proud of the fact that I'm not, I just work, I am. Yeah. So in terms of a focus, I'm very sort of career-driven, very work-focused. I'm shy to everything else, honestly. And that's not in any way helpful. Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Fabulous. Right. One of the things that we have in my workplace is we have highs of success in terms of we celebrate very, very quickly, and then we move on very, very quickly, and we don't offer any support to anyone else in that transition phase of moving on to the next thing. And I guess for your world, it's massively amplified. Success is a gold medal or a world championship or whatever it might be. And then how did you get support beyond that? You talked about that graph, and that huge drop-off.
Yeah.
What infrastructure was in place there? Do you still get the coaching? Do you still get the bits and pieces that you had beforehand?
Yeah, I guess it kind of leans into, why is it that it's this quote, this saying that's dead famous, it's easy to get to the top, it's really hard to stay there. And I think that's a lot of that's down to an individual's and a team's motivation diminishes, where you have a massive high. like that sort of graph I crudely drew out with my finger on the board, and then everyone comes down to the same base level, and it's like you have this existential crisis, or like, and I've been there more than once. And I guess the only thing you could try and convey to your team is, like, for me, like, people always ask me which is my favorite medal. The Beijing one, my first, it's my least favorite. The London one, it wasn't just about the home crowd and the home experience, but it meant more to me because, we had to sort of like pick ourselves up and go again. And then, the Rio one, after the back surgery and after that and after all the mental health issues, that meant more to me than any of the other stuff I've ever won put together, by far. And if I went on to win another one in Tokyo, that would have meant more to me than anything else I'd have done preceding that. So if you can try and convey that to them, like, it's that kind of feeling of success and satisfaction kind of compounds, if that makes sense, if you get it right. But to get there, you're right, it's going to be almost exponentially more difficult. Yeah. There's a beauty in the struggle. You just don't see it till you're on the other side.
I think I've got the mic. Pass to me. Thank you very much, Ed. It was a pleasure to sit and listen to what you've shared. I want to bring back to the concept of values you talked about before. And I was very fortunate to hear a talk from another one of your Olympic colleagues from London 2012, and she talked very openly about the concept of team-based values and what they did to hold each other up to account to try and make sure those values were lived. Yeah. I'm conscious you talked about making a values-based decision yourself as an individual. But did you do anything as a team through that journey you went on to create that psychologically safe environment where if someone else felt you weren't fulfilling a values-based decision, they would feel safe to speak up and raise that with you?
Yeah. Good question. I think I spoke about Dave earlier on, and I saw about Dave. He was quite forthcoming. He spoke to all of us en masse, quite a lot. He was quite a charismatic leader, and this kind of idea that we could fail safe, fall forward, whatever you call it, was communicated effectively to everyone. And this isn't a dig at anyone, but I think we kind of had that less and less as I sort of progressed through my years of British cycling. And what I'm trying to get is I ended up as someone in the system, still a cyclist, so somebody with no real authority or power at all. But I tried my hardest to harvest that culture. You know what I mean? I was trying to be like the tail wagging the dog. And everyone in this room, whether you're the CEO, you're leading a small team, or you have no official authority in there. Everyone can play their part in trying to harvest that environment of being open and honest and having good team values. And honestly, like the last 6, 7, 8 years of my cycling career, nobody sat me down actually and said, what are your team values? Like, think about this. Let's all make value-based decisions together. But I spoke about it with the boys when we were out on rides. If somebody did something that wasn't quite sure, or if I did something, I said, I'm sorry, guys. Actually, that's probably the best way to convey it. Lead with example. I'm sorry, boys. What I did then was not in alignment with high-performing team values. I made a bad decision there. Call yourself out on it. Show some ownership, show some responsibility. The word sorry is just a meaningless noise unless it's kind of backed up with a meaningful change. Show that you mean it. And if nothing else, be the tail that wags the dog. Yeah.
Wow. I could see the bar calling.
Sorry, guys.
That's Ed, it's been a really insightful hour, and I really want to thank you on behalf of everyone here for how you conveyed your story, the highs and lows, and how you didn't sugarcoat it. And in that richness comes real insight, and I think I want to thank you for that. So thank you very much, and please show your appreciation for Ed.